Lonely rancher, let a native orphan stay the night. She drew symbols all over his walls. The symbols were everywhere when Marcus Thornton woke at dawn. What had been plain wooden walls the night before were now covered in intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Spirals, circles, and flowing lines interconnected across every surface of his cabin, drawn by the small hands of a Cherokee girl who had appeared at his door seeking shelter. 8-year-old Ayana had said nothing when he offered her food and a warm bed, but through the night she had transformed his isolated Montana ranch house into something that looked like a sacred temple. What Marcus did not yet understand was that the child was not just an orphan seeking shelter, but a bridge between worlds, and the symbols she had drawn would soon bring visitors who would change his life forever. Marcus had been living alone in the remote valley for 7 years, ever since his discharge from the Union Army with a shattered leg that ended his military career. At 42, he had built a life of deliberate isolation on 1,500 acres of pristine wilderness, where he raised cattle and horses while trying to forget the horrors he had witnessed during the war between the states. His ranch house was simple but comfortable, built from local timber, with a wide porch that offered views of the surrounding mountains and endless sky. The solitude suited Marcus perfectly after years of chaos and violence. His damaged leg ached constantly, reminding him daily of the cannonball that had nearly killed him at Gettysburg. But the peaceful rhythms of ranch life provided exactly the kind of healing his troubled soul required. He had chosen this remote location specifically because it offered complete privacy, with the nearest neighbor 40 miles away, and the closest town a 3-day journey through mountain passes that became impassable during winter. Marcus had always maintained respectful relations with the few Native Americans who occasionally passed through his territory. Unlike many settlers, he understood that he was living on land that had been indigenous territory for countless generations, and he tried to show appropriate consideration for that history. He never interfered with traditional hunting or gathering activities, always offered water and food to travelers in need, and had learned enough of various tribal languages to conduct basic conversations. The child had appeared at his door, just as the sun was setting on a cold October evening. Marcus first noticed her from his kitchen window, a small figure walking slowly across the meadow that bordered his property. Even from a distance, it was clear that something was wrong. Her gait was unsteady, her clothing was inadequate for the dropping temperature, and she appeared to be completely alone in wilderness that could be deadly even for experienced adults. Marcus grabbed his coat and hurried outside to meet the unexpected visitor. Up close, her situation was even more concerning than he had imagined. She appeared to be about 8 years old, with the distinctive features and traditional dress that identified her as Cherokee. Her long black hair was matted and dirty, her clothes were torn and stained, and her feet were bare despite the frost that was already forming on the grass. Most unsettling was her expression. The child's dark eyes held a depth of sadness that seemed far too mature for someone her age, and she moved with the careful wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. When she saw Marcus approaching, she stopped walking but did not flee, simply standing in the gathering darkness as if waiting to see whether he represented safety or danger. "Hello there," Marcus said gently, stopping several feet away so as not to appear threatening. "Are you lost?" The child looked at him for a long moment without speaking, her intelligent eyes seeming to assess his intentions. Finally, she nodded slightly, though whether she was acknowledging his question or confirming that she was indeed lost remained unclear. "Do you speak English?" Marcus asked. Again a slight nod, but still no words. Marcus could see that the child was shivering in the cold evening air, and he knew that she would not survive a night outdoors in the dropping temperatures. "Would you like to come inside where it is warm? I have food and a safe place to sleep." The girl studied his face for another long moment, perhaps trying to read his character in his expression. Something she saw there must have reassured her, because she finally took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was close enough for Marcus to see the extent of her condition. She was clearly malnourished, with the hollow cheeks and prominent ribs that spoke of prolonged hunger. Her clothing, while traditional in style, was made from poor materials and showed signs of hard travel over rough terrain. Most concerning were the fresh cuts and bruises on her arms and legs, suggesting that she had been living rough for some time. Marcus led the child into his cabin, noting how she moved with the silent grace of someone who had learned to avoid detection. Once inside, she stood perfectly still near the door, her eyes taking in every detail of the room as if memorizing potential escape routes. "My name is Marcus," he said softly, settling into a chair across the room to give her space. "What is your name?" "Ayanna," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the first word she had spoken, and Marcus felt a small surge of relief that she was willing to communicate at all. "That is a beautiful name," Marcus replied. "Are you hungry, Ayanna?" The child nodded eagerly, and Marcus could see her swallow hard at the mention of food. He prepared a simple meal of bread, preserved meat, and warm milk, watching as she ate with the desperate efficiency of someone who had known real hunger. Despite her obvious need, she ate carefully and quietly, showing manners that spoke of a good upbringing, before whatever circumstances had left her wandering alone. As Ayanna ate, Marcus tried to learn more about her situation through gentle questions. Gradually, he pieced together a heartbreaking story of loss and displacement. Her parents had died in a cholera outbreak that had swept through her Cherokee community the previous summer. With no close relatives willing or able to care for her, she had been passed from family to family until finally running away from a situation that she would not describe, but that had clearly been traumatic. "I have been walking for many days," Ayanna said quietly, her English careful but clear. "I do not know where I am going, only that I cannot go back." Marcus felt his heart break for this small, brave child who had faced more hardship in her short life than many adults ever experienced. "You do not have to go anywhere tonight," he assured her. "You can stay here as long as you need to feel safe." When it came time for sleep, Marcus showed Ayanna to his spare room, which was simply furnished but clean and comfortable. He provided her with warm blankets and a basin of water for washing, then left her alone to rest. As he settled into his own bed, Marcus found himself listening for sounds from the other room, wanting to make sure his young guest was comfortable and secure. The cabin was quiet for several hours, and Marcus assumed that Ayanna had fallen asleep from exhaustion. It was near midnight when he first heard the soft sounds of movement from her room, followed by what seemed like the gentle scratching of something against wood. Thinking she might be having trouble sleeping or perhaps needed something, Marcus got up to check on her. When he quietly opened the door to the spare room, Marcus was amazed by what he saw. Ayanna was wide awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her back to him. In her hands, she held what appeared to be a piece of charcoal, and she was carefully drawing symbols on the wooden wall beside her bed. Even in the dim light from the dying fire in the main room, Marcus could see that the patterns she was creating were intricate and purposeful. Not wanting to disturb what was clearly an important activity for the child, Marcus quietly closed the door and returned to his own room. Throughout the night, he could hear the soft sounds of her work continuing, occasionally punctuated by long periods of silence that suggested she was planning her next design or perhaps resting between sessions. When Marcus woke at dawn and emerged from his bedroom, he was completely unprepared for what greeted him. The transformation of his cabin was so dramatic that for a moment he wondered if he was still dreaming. Every wooden surface that Ayanna could reach was now covered with symbols, patterns, and interconnected designs that seemed to flow and dance in the morning light streaming through the windows. The artwork was breathtaking in its complexity and beauty, spirals and circles intertwined with angular patterns that reminded Marcus of lightning or flowing water. Animal figures appeared to run along the walls, their forms stylized but unmistakably representing deer, eagles, bears, and other creatures of the forest. Plant motifs wound around doorframes and windows, creating the impression that the cabin had become part of the natural world rather than separate from it. Most remarkable was how the symbols seemed to relate to each other across different walls and surfaces. Lines and patterns flowed from one design to another, creating a unified whole that transformed the interior of the cabin into something that felt sacred and alive. The charcoal markings appeared to glow with their own inner light, though Marcus knew that must be a trick of the early morning sun. Ayanna was sitting quietly in the center of the main room, surrounded by her artwork, her small hands stained black with charcoal. When she saw Marcus emerge from his bedroom, she looked up with an expression that combined pride in her work with uncertainty about his reaction. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I could not sleep. and the symbols wanted to be drawn. I can clean them off if you are angry. Marcus walked slowly around the room, marveling at the intricacy and beauty of what the child had created during the night. Far from being angry, he was awed by the artistic skill and spiritual depth that the drawings represented. This was not the random scribbling of a bored child, but the work of someone with a deep connection to cultural traditions that went back countless generations. "This is beautiful, Ayanna," Marcus said honestly. "I have never seen anything like it." "What do the symbols mean?" The child's face brightened at his positive response, and she began to explain the significance of different patterns and designs. Some represented prayers for protection and blessing. Others told stories of her Cherokee ancestors and their relationship with the natural world. The animal figures were spirit guides, she explained, while the plant motifs honored the green things that provided food and medicine. "My grandmother taught me the old symbols before she died," Ayanna said, her voice carrying both sadness and pride. "She said they were important to remember, even if other people no longer understood their meaning. Last night, I felt her spirit with me, telling me to make this place sacred and safe." Marcus was deeply moved by the child's explanation and by the trust she had shown in sharing her cultural knowledge with him. He could see that the symbols were not just decoration, but a form of prayer and protection, a way of claiming sanctuary in a world that had shown her little kindness. Over the following days, as Ayanna grew more comfortable in her new surroundings, she continued to add to her artwork. Each morning brought new symbols and patterns, transforming different areas of the cabin into a living gallery of Cherokee spiritual art. Marcus found himself fascinated by the stories and meanings behind each design, and he began to understand that his young guest possessed knowledge and abilities that went far beyond her years. Ayanna proved to be remarkably mature and capable for her age. She helped with cooking and cleaning without being asked, showed an intuitive understanding of animals that made her invaluable in caring for Marcus's livestock, and demonstrated a knowledge of medicinal plants that amazed him. But it was her spiritual sensitivity that truly set her apart. "The land speaks to me," she explained one evening as they sat by the fire. "It tells me about the people who lived here before, about the animals and plants that need protection, about the spirits that watch over this valley. The symbols help me listen better and help the spirits know that we respect them." Marcus began to notice changes in his own awareness as he spent time surrounded by Ayanna's symbols. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds carried new meanings, and he found himself noticing details of the natural world that had previously escaped his attention. It was as if the child's artwork had opened his senses to dimensions of reality that he had never perceived before. The first visitors arrived exactly 1 week after Ayanna had completed her initial series of symbols. Marcus was working in his barn when he heard the sound of approaching horses, a rare occurrence in his isolated valley. When he emerged to investigate, he was surprised to see a small group of Cherokee riders approaching his ranch house. The delegation consisted of 3 adults, an elderly man who carried himself with the dignity of a tribal elder, a middle-aged woman whose bearing suggested she was a person of importance within her community, and a younger man who appeared to be a warrior or scout. They rode with the quiet confidence of people who were comfortable in the wilderness and knew exactly where they were going. Marcus walked out to meet them, uncertain about their intentions, but determined to show appropriate respect. The elderly man dismounted and approached with formal courtesy, his weathered face grave, but not unfriendly. "I am Joseph Ridge," the elder said in excellent English. "We have come seeking a Cherokee child who is lost. Her name is Ayanna, and she carries great gifts that are precious to our people." Marcus felt his heart sink as he realized that Ayanna's time of safety might be coming to an end. "She is here," he admitted, "but I need to know that she will be safe with you. She has been through terrible things, and she came to me seeking protection." Joseph Ridge nodded understandingly. "We know of her sufferings, and we have not come to take her anywhere she does not wish to go. But we must speak with her about the symbols she has been creating. Word of her artwork has spread among our people, and there are those who believe she may be the one we have been waiting for." At that moment, Ayanna appeared in the doorway of the cabin, her face lighting up with recognition when she saw the visitors. She ran to Joseph Ridge and embraced him warmly, speaking rapidly in Cherokee while tears of joy streamed down her cheeks. "This is my great-uncle," she explained to Marcus when she switched back to English. He is the keeper of our sacred stories and the teacher of the old ways. I thought all my family was gone. The reunion was emotional and heartwarming, but Marcus noticed that the Cherokee visitors were also paying careful attention to the symbols visible through the open cabin door. When Ayanna invited them inside to see her complete work, their reaction was profound and immediate. Joseph Ridge stood in the center of the transformed cabin, his eyes wide with amazement as he studied the intricate patterns that covered every surface. The woman, who was introduced as Sarah Ross, a medicine woman and spiritual leader, moved slowly around the room, her face showing deep reverence for what she was seeing. "Child," Joseph Ridge said to Ayanna in a voice thick with emotion, "do you understand what you have created here?" Ayanna shook her head, though her expression suggested she knew the symbols were important beyond their aesthetic beauty. "These are the sacred markings of the first people," Sarah Ross explained, her voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "They have not been seen in complete form for more than a century. The knowledge of how to create them was thought to be lost forever when the last keeper died without passing on the full teaching." She went on to explain that the symbols Ayanna had drawn represented a complete spiritual protection system that had been used by Cherokee ancestors to sanctify important places and ensure the blessing of the spirits. The fact that a young child had been able to recreate these sacred markings without formal training suggested that she possessed rare spiritual gifts. "The elders have been waiting for someone who could restore the old knowledge," Joseph Ridge said, his gaze moving between Ayanna and Marcus. "Many of our young people no longer remember the old ways, and we feared that crucial wisdom would be lost forever. But the spirits have guided Ayanna to rediscover what was forgotten." Marcus listened to this explanation with growing understanding of just how special his young guest truly was. But he was also concerned about what this revelation might mean for her future and for the relationship they had developed. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Will you take her away to train with your elders?" Joseph Ridge and Sarah Ross exchanged meaningful glances before the elder responded. "That depends on many things. Ayanna's gifts are indeed extraordinary, but she is still a child who needs stability and love. From what we can see, she has found both of those things here." They went on to explain that the Cherokee community had been debating the best way to preserve and transmit their spiritual traditions in a rapidly changing world. The appearance of Ayanna's sacred symbols had convinced many that a new approach was needed, one that honored both traditional knowledge and contemporary realities. "We propose that this ranch become a place of learning," Sarah Ross said, her voice carrying the authority of someone speaking for her entire community. "Ayanna could remain here with Marcus, whom she clearly trusts and loves, while Cherokee teachers come to share their knowledge and learn from her unique abilities." The proposal was both exciting and daunting. Marcus's isolated ranch would be transformed into a bridge between cultures, a place where ancient wisdom could be preserved and adapted for future generations. It would mean the end of his solitude, but the beginning of something far more meaningful. Over the following weeks, as plans for this new arrangement took shape, Marcus found himself at the center of an extraordinary cultural exchange. Cherokee elders arrived to study Ayanna's symbols and to teach her more about their traditional meanings. Young Cherokee people came to learn from her intuitive understanding of the old ways, and gradually, non-Cherokee visitors began arriving as well, drawn by stories of the sacred symbols and the remarkable child who had created them. Marcus discovered that his role in this developing community was as important as Ayanna's, though in different ways. His ranch provided the neutral ground where cultural exchange could take place. His practical skills were essential for supporting the growing number of visitors, and his genuine respect for Cherokee traditions helped create an atmosphere of mutual understanding. "You have given Ayanna more than shelter," Joseph Ridge told him during one of his visits. "You have given her the freedom to discover her gifts without pressure or expectation. In doing so, you have helped preserve knowledge that might otherwise have been lost forever." As autumn turned to winter, the ranch that had once been a place of solitude became a center of learning and cultural preservation. Ayanna continued to create new symbols and patterns, each one revealing additional layers of ancient knowledge. Cherokee teachers worked alongside Marcus to document and interpret her artwork, creating written records that would ensure the wisdom would not be lost again. But perhaps most importantly, The ranch became a place where two cultures could meet and learn from each other with genuine respect and mutual benefit. Marcus learned Cherokee traditions and spiritual practices, while Cherokee visitors gained insights into the practical challenges of preserving cultural knowledge in a modern world. The symbols that Ayanna had drawn on Marcus's walls during her first night at the ranch had indeed transformed his life, but not in the way he could ever have imagined. What had begun as a simple act of kindness to a lost child had evolved into something far greater, a new model for how different peoples could work together to preserve what was precious while adapting to what was necessary. Years later, when scholars and spiritual leaders came from around the world to study the sacred markings that Ayanna had restored, Marcus would often reflect on the miracle of that first night. A lonely rancher had offered shelter to a native orphan, and in return she had drawn symbols that bridged not just walls but worlds, creating connections that would endure for generations to come. The child who had appeared at his door seeking nothing more than a warm meal and a safe bed had brought with her gifts that no one could have anticipated. And in learning to see his humble ranch through her eyes, Marcus had discovered that even the most isolated places could become centers of profound significance when touched by the right kind of wisdom and love. The symbols still covered the walls of the ranch house, their meanings deeper and more complex than Marcus had ever imagined that first morning when he woke to find his world transformed. They served as a daily reminder that the most important changes in life often come not through grand gestures or dramatic events, but through the simple act of opening our doors and our hearts to those who need our help. And Ayanna, now grown into a respected teacher and keeper of Cherokee wisdom, continued to create new symbols and new connections, her work spreading far beyond the walls of one Montana ranch to influence how indigenous knowledge was preserved and shared throughout North America. The lonely rancher and the orphan child had found each other at exactly the right moment, and together they had created something beautiful that would endure long after both of them were gone.